you so many Holocaust movies and make sure it was in our textbooks. It's a part of growing up in America, learn about the Holocaust.
This too is another lie and bunch of propaganda. I do not think that Candace Owens is capable of truth. I don't think she is. This is totally not true. And the reason it isn't, and it's strange, because me and my sister were just talking about this the other day, about my grandmother, because now I learned about the Holocaust, but there's no big teaching in school about it. There isn't. I mean, we're going way back, but I was they put the Anne Frank movie on. That's it. That's it. It was later that I educated myself about it. So she's trying to act like that America propagandized too. No, my grandmother, because me and my sister had asked my grandmother, like, how did you, we learned about it in school and we're like, this is horrible. Did you not know about this? And our grandmother said, no, we did. She said, we weren't told about the atrocities of World War II until long after World War II. They weren't told. The American people were not told. And I don't think that was done purposely. I think it's because the events were so monstrous. So monstrous. Like, if you could try to put yourself in any of the military's shoes or any of the allies, because when the allies, which was Russia, France, UK, and US, finally defeated Hitler and realized, coming up on these camps, like, oh, good Lord, like, this is, what do we even do? Like, that this was able to go on. And then you have the German people that were victimized because they were so indoctrinated, which is why they broke Germany up into 4 different parts. And the UK had their part they handled, Russia had their part they handled, US had their part they handled, France had their part, and it was kept like that for many years. And one of the things was, Germany, you can no longer have a standing army. You took us into 2 world wars, but the biggest thing was, like, what do you do? Because the German people had been so absolutely abused with propaganda day in and day out that it's like, how do you break somebody of that? That's why they broke the country into different sections. Candace doesn't ever tell anybody any of that. She writes it off like it's total propaganda, and she's a liar. She's such an effing liar. She really is. She's such a liar. In my opinion, they don't really teach enough about it. They don't. Not even to this day. They don't. How much do you hear about, the slavery of black people? Nothing. I mean, not trying to belittle that, but look, nothing even comes close to what was done to any other group than what was done to the Jews in the Holocaust. No, nothing comes close. Nothing. Not even the black slavery or any slavery. This was beyond any of it. Even all slavery in the world put together, that was still worse than it. Because it was so monstrous on so many levels. The entire public, all the population of Germany, had been so indoctrinated that these atrocities took place. Like, even though it was World War II and people, you may think, oh, it's just people fighting. No, the millions of people that were killed because they were in camps. They were exterminated in gas chambers. They were experimented on in the most grotesque ways by Dr. Mengele. They were just, this is all absolute proof, and she writes it off as if it's propaganda. She's such a lying, deranged woman. They don't even educate enough in the U.S. about the Holocaust. They do not. They don't. But I can absolutely tell you she's an effing liar. My grandmother did not, they did not know about, they knew that yes, America was with the Allies and fighting World War II, fighting against Hitler, but most media didn't want to report the atrocities. And I read many years ago that I think a lot of it was they didn't know, because the atrocities were so absolutely monstrous. How do you report it? And then, trying to balance it with the fear of, not wanting to traumatize the public too. So that's the reason they waited so long before they reported, like they were reporting on the war and some of it here and there, but not to the extent, and my grandmother wouldn't lie. Candace would, but my grandmother wouldn't. I had read a story, or I heard it on something, it was like 7 years ago, and it gave me the chills because, they used the trains to take people to the Jews to the different camps, and they just threw them in those rail cars on top of each other. They just stripped them and threw them in the rail car. I mean, they did everything to dehumanize them. You want to talk about absolutely being an antichrist, Hitler. I mean, it's the worst. I think that's the worst antichrist there's been in history. Right, is right there. But the railroads. In Germany, many of the churches ran along the side of the railroads. So on Sundays, when Germans would gather for worship, those rail cars, when they would go by, would have, every rail car had Jews, stacked in them, screaming and crying and hollering out for help. And people in the churches would sing louder to drown out their voices. There's never been a greater human rights atrocity than that, not even in Gaza, which is why the Nazis currently, like Candace, are trying to make it seem like that the Jews are committing this atrocity. No, they're not. That they're genociding. Because she's a hateful heart. God's handed her over, okay? The way she's talking. And here's the other thing. Then 15 years later, you get Kennedy in. Well, Joe Kennedy Sr. was already getting a hold of the movie industry because he wanted more not pro-Nazi movies put out. Not truthful movies. He wanted more pro-Nazi movies put out because he was a Nazi sympathizer. That's why all these people, put JFK on some pedestal. Oh, he goes after AIPAC. Yeah, well, I would expect, just like Obama, anybody that hated Jews would of course go after AIPAC. Nazis would go after AIPAC. And I don't think there's ever been any group worse than the Nazis. So when you see these modern day Nazis, just realize they're completely deranged.